From London, this is the Orwellians podcast. I'm Roland Elliott Brown. My guest today is Andrei Kolesnikov. Andrei is a columnist for New Times and Novaya Gazeta and a contributor to Foreign Affairs magazine. He was also a senior fellow at the Carnegie Moscow Centre, a think tank connected with the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, until the Russian government forced it to close in 2022. That same year, the Russian government labeled him a foreign agent. Despite everything, he comes to us today from Moscow, where he wrote his new book, The Closing of the Russian Mind, How Putin's Ideology Took the Nation Hostage. Andrei, welcome.
Thanks a lot for this invitation and paying attention to this book.
Yeah. So before Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Western analysts were not used to thinking about Putin's Russia as ideological. Conventional wisdom held that Russia had abandoned ideology at the end of the Cold War. For decades, Western analysts and leaders assumed that Putin was an autocrat, a kleptocrat, but also rational and pragmatic. In your book, you argue that Putin has created a new ideology, a demodernizing project rooted in a selective view of Russian history that increasingly demands the participation of ordinary Russians. One of the clues to this emerging ideology, which I don't think you mentioned directly in the book, was when on February 21st, 2022, in a televised address just days before the invasion, Putin referred to Ukraine as part of Russia's spiritual space. That seems like a good place to start. What did Putin mean by calling Ukraine part of Russia's spiritual space, and how does that relate to Russia's new ideology?
Spiritual means, in his understanding, territorial, because if you want spirit, you must have territory for it, such some kind of a space for the spirit. He meant that this is a sphere of influence of Russia, for sure, culturally, territorially, politically, geopolitically, and so on and so forth. He contradicted himself, sometimes saying that Russians and Ukrainians, this is the one nation, but sometimes he or his colleagues, his members of his inner circle, they say that Ukrainians must be punished by Russians because of their wrong political behavior, for their history, for some historical hostilities, contradictions between two nations. So it's very, very contradictory in his narrative. But the main idea is clear. This is a mixture of nationalism and imperialism. He means that Ukraine is a part of the Russian Empire. Sometimes he says that he is not an imperialist, and this is not about territories, but what for. He's waging the war for 4 years, maybe even more if we'll take the starting point as an annexation of Crimea. So, this mixture has very deep roots in Russian history. In the history of Russian, let's say, political thinking, because we can remember the isolation of Russia in Middle Ages, isolation from Europe. We can remember Count Sergei Uvarov, who is the author of the famous triad. Autocracy, nationality, orthodoxy. And this has roots of the same ideology which went through the ages, and now this eclectic and chaotic combination of ideas is a nearly official ideology of Putin. The constitution of the Russian Federation doesn't allow to have an official ideology, but nevertheless this new ideology of Putin is codified in his orders, presidential orders, in historical textbooks for children, for school children, and in some let's say, unified textbooks for students, like the foundations of the Russian statehood. Some people are now writing books with a unified understanding of the economic process, political economy, philosophy, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. So to delve a bit into the ideology, we've got the Middle Ages, the idea of 1,000-year history reaching back to Kievan Rus, which is where the Russian Orthodox faith, in a sense, is established. We've got the idea of Moscow as the third Rome, or like the last true center of Christianity. We've got Sergei Uvarov, who you mentioned, the statesman under Nicholas I, the ethos of orthodoxy, autocracy, nationality, which I believe was a response to the French Revolution, if I'm not mistaken.
To some extent, but at the same time, it was a formula for, let's say, for the foundations of this new, more or less new national ideology.
One of the things I found really interesting, and which might be an interesting way in for Western readers who have all heard of Dostoevsky, is Dostoevsky's notion of the Russian idea, Russians as a god-bearing people with a mission to save Europe. Tell us about that.
Yeah, this is true. So it was a famous speech of Dostoevsky at the anniversary of Pushkin in 1880, which inspired strongly people who heard the speech. It was about Russians as a nation which is ready to accept everything from the world, to answer to all the requests, so to say, from the world, and to be the best and the brightest in the world. Even liberal-minded writers like Ivan Turgenev accepted it as a great speech. But it's just like with Marco Rubio's speech in Munich conference, with a standing ovation. But when you read the text, you see that it is a bit anti-European, not pro-European speech. The same story with Dostoevsky. When you peer into details, you see that it is the same Russian nationalism. It is the same Russian spiritual, in the case of Dostoevsky, expansionism, and messianism. What is important? The mission of the Russian nation is the main point in this ideology. And this understanding is quite close to Putin's understanding of the Russian mission, of his personal mission, of the recreation of the Russian greatness. This is the same mega ideology, like making something great again. So
Right.
the idea of Putin is make Russia great again. So we must return to our roots and return at the same time our territories, our spheres of influence. We don't want the territories of other nations, but we must take our territories, to return them, to liberate them, like propaganda says.
Where do Britain and the European Union fit into the new ideology?
You know, these are enemies. For sure, to justify this very archaic vision of the world, you must have some propaganda explanations of the current situation, and you must have enemies, internal enemies, domestic enemies, like dissidents, like foreign agents, like undesirable organizations, civil society, NGOs, etc. And at the same time, you must have external enemies, which are also equally important to justify the expansionism. So, and in hierarchy, today's hierarchy of enemies, Great Britain is the first enemy, then Europe comes, and only then the United States, because of Trump, who is the last hope for money for Putin's regime, for a big deal, economic deal. Because of that, last year was the year of Trump's triumph in Russian eyes. But now this is kind of a period of small disillusionment in his capacity to help us. so to
Well,
say.
how far the mighty have fallen, because the U.S. used to be known as the Glavny Protivnik, the main enemy, and now they're number three?
Number three, maybe after Europe, yes.
Yeah.
But, it could be changed any day in a case of worsening personal relations between Putin and Trump, for instance. If somebody like Biden will come in the next presidential term, it will be also a pretext to announce the United States again as a main source of evil, according to all these famous conspiracy theories, which are also very important for Russian ideologies in any time. Everyone is trying to undermine our greatness, our unity, our territory, and sometimes this is Masonry, sometimes this is more about Jews, just like it was in previous periods. Right now, also some ideologies, like, for instance, so-called Orthodox oligarch Malafeev. He's lecturing students in the Faculty of Political Science of Moscow State University, and his lectures are full of this kind of conspiracy, mentioning Jews who were always kind of a fifth column inside Russia or enemies outside Russia. So it could be changed, but for the moment it's important that Anglo-Saxons are always our main enemies, and so British side is still Anglo-Saxon, so they mention British trace in anything they mention, in everything they mention.
Yeah. You have you have a chapter in the book called History as a Weapon, which describes the mechanisms of Kremlin propaganda, wartime indoctrination in schools and universities, where, of course, life chances are controlled. Tell us about the recent changes in Russian education.
Primarily, it's more about textbooks on history, world history and Russian history for different degrees, different classes at school. So-called unified textbooks, creating unified understanding of the world. It's important for the regime to indoctrinate children, because Putin wants to live forever, so the next generation also must vote for him, must support him, must go to the trenches for him, etc., etc. The education has changed for sure, but the desire is to make this process total, making all the families, all the children obedient to the unified vision of the world. But for the moment, it's not impossible. Sometimes there are good teachers in schools. Sometimes there are good professors in the universities. They refuse to follow the mainstream discourse, and they're trying to lecture children, to lecture students in a good way, in a normal way. So everything depends on people, as always. Everything depends on institutions, on this or that school, this or that university. It looks like that Putin is trying to copy the Soviet Union education, which was based not on nationalism and imperialism, but on Marxism-Leninism. It was the same. So in my students' years, we had such a specific discipline like scientific communism. As I understand now, it was an introduction into philosophy, into political science, into political economy, something like that, from the Marxist point of view. Not more. I can't remember anything from this discipline. Absolutely. History of Communist Party also was such obligatory discipline. So they're substituting this scientific communism with scientific Putinism, the foundations of the Russian statehood. This is the proper discipline for it. But again, still you have an opportunity to refuse something, to resist not reading these books, not opening these textbooks and trying to to have a normal education, self-education at the end of the day.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Soviet education. One figure we haven't mentioned who's important to the new ideology is Stalin, right? And so I guess that's what the contemporary education has in common with, well, certain phases certainly of Soviet education is a reverence, or at least a partial reverence, for Stalin. Tell me about Stalin's legacy under the emerging ideology.
I know it's interesting that in my school years and students' years, the very attitude towards Stalin was very cautious, very, let's say, balanced. So with some achievements, with some cruelty, not a lot of information about repressions. It was more about family memory and transmission of private memory in families. Then it was a period of the second de-Stalinization. The first one was during Khrushchev's thaw. And we thought in 1990s that this is the end of the story. This is the end of history in our specific Russian sense as well. So Stalin is bad. Lenin, it found out, is also bad. So communists are trying to turn our country to the past. So let's vote for Yeltsin, who is not so good, but he's the only alternative figure to communists in this country, just like it was in 1996 presidential elections. But after Putin, after the period, initial years of Putin, it found out that Stalin was not so bad, and it was very slow infiltration into brains of the idea of the recreation of our greatness, recreation of our traditions, the idea that we're humiliated by the disruption of the Soviet Union. And somebody disrupted it, and Gorbachev participated in it, and Yeltsin partly participated in it. So let's return to our roots in that sense. What are our roots? Like Russian idea, traditionalism, fundamentalism, orthodoxy, but Stalin as well, because he was good enough as a state manager. There was a phrase in one of the textbooks, an efficient manager, like this.
I've heard that, yeah.
Yes, and so the level of respect to Stalin was growing, has been growing all the time through recent years. Now the figures are quite high, and this Re-Stalinization is nearly open. When there are monuments to Stalin, when there is a lot of facts of demolition of memory places for repressed people. This is the same process, two sides of the same process. Putin doesn't mention Stalin frequently, absolutely.
I've noticed, yeah.
No needed it, absolutely. Everyone understands what is happening, especially when in one of the most active metro station in Moscow, the bareliev was recreated, bareliev to Stalin from 1940s and 1950s.
Right. So this is a major sculpture that people pass, presumably when they're changing lines on the station.
Yes, absolutely.
And so they've re-erected a relief of Stalin, which do you know when the original one was taken down?
I think it was like at the edge of 1940s and 1950s.
Okay, right.
Something like that. But now Stalin looks like a Georgian dancer. Originally he was more, let's say, cruel and serious. Now he's beautiful and and pleasant person like this. But maybe a million of dwellers of Moscow are crossing this station during the day.
Yeah.
So when they see Stalin, it is routinized. This is new normal to praise Stalin, to make a tribute to him. And he's a symbol. Everyone instinctively understands that Putin is Stalin today. Efficient manager who is trying to reunite the nation, to return our greatness, to liberate territories, so on and so forth. This is again the same mixture of nationalism and imperialism, because Stalin was an imperialist. And Kissinger said about Stalin that he understood only one hard currency: territories. The same we can say about Putin, absolutely.
In the book, you rely on polling by the Levada Center to provide a picture of Russian public opinion. There are often dramatic shifts that take place after Russian military actions, which sometimes lead to changes in opinion, not only about the present, but also about the past. For example, which countries were allies of the Soviet Union during the Second World War. And these changes are observed over time. So in relation to the annexation of Crimea, then in relation to the beginning of the full-scale invasion. What are your conclusions about the relationship between military action and public opinion?
It's more or less direct. I mean, when we are at the period of warmongering, we have the growth of ratings of power as such, and of Putin as a leader of some state bodies, state institutions. The same situation we have noticed during Georgian War in 2008, during the annexation of Crimea in 2014. And for sure during this period of time. So this is iron law of Russian public opinion. The other question is whether people are accepting sincerely this Putin's discourse. Do they sincerely support this very long war? Some of them, yes, for sure. There are layers of the population who are imitating this support. Mostly people don't want to think, don't want to accept reality. They prefer to be distanced from this war, to concentrate on their private life, and authorities allows them to behave like this. Yes, you must support us, sometimes vocally, but nevertheless, being obedient, you have an opportunity to be silent and to concentrate on your private life. Some sociologists name it like a fetal position. Don't touch me. I'm good, I'm small, I can't understand anything. I believe you to the great parent. So you're such a paternalistic way of perception of reality. And this is all about majority. Sociologists say that maybe only 1/5 of the population aggressively supports Putin's regime, Putin's war, Putin's ideology. 1/5 is against it.
Turbo patriots, as you call them.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And in the middle, we have a mass which can move from one point of view to the other point of view. The notorious 80 or 70% of the support of the special military operation of Putin, it could be changed the next day after the end of the war, for instance, just like it was in Germany in 1945. No Nazis at all in the whole country. Everyone was a secret supporter of democracy and anti-Hitlerist discourse. The same story with the death of Stalin, and especially with this famous Khrushchev speech about cult of the personality in 1956.
The so-called secret speech.
After that, everyone said that, oh, okay, I didn't know anything about these cruelties, about this criminal situation. So what a pity, but now we will support more open society, etc., etc. And I'm sure that tomorrow we will witness, if we will survive this period for sure, we will witness the same situation in mass psychology, mass behavior. But for the moment, majority prefers to accept this ideological discourse, which is justifying the war, and sometimes people are accepting this discourse as a real discourse, saying like, okay, yes, I didn't think about our humiliation, so about our traditions, maybe we must return to our traditions, and for the moment we don't have foreign businesses, maybe we can produce ourselves something finally. This is justifying for yourself the current situation.
Yeah, well, obviously it recalls the line in Orwell's 1984. Oceania was always at war with Eastasia, or Oceania was at war with Eastasia. Oceania has always been at war with Eastasia. I mean, the particularly interesting part was about alliances in the Second World War. Who was and wasn't an ally? Was Britain an ally? Was France an ally? Was the United States an ally? And that this changes depending on the current global situation.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Russians were always thinking, this is true, that we were main victims of Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union. We suffered more, and so we were involved in this war to the high extent, and we were victorious. We were the main players in this game, and I think this is true historically.
Yeah.
But we had allies. We had the United States, France, China, by the way, Great Britain. But now the discourse has changed. The main idea is that we were always attacked by Europe. For the moment, not the United States, but Europe. And Napoleon, Hitler, and NATO, this is the same.
Yeah.
What we're doing now, we are continuing the Great Patriotic War of 1940s. This is Russian word for World War II. So, and our veterans of current days, they are equal to veterans of the Great Patriotic War. It's very painful for liberal-minded, pro-democratic people here, because morally we can't accept this idea. These are different wars, absolutely. This is not liberation from Nazism of different territories. This is not the returning of our pride in such a way, but this is the part of the main ideological discourse right now. Putin sometimes mentions allies in this war, but with such a kind of a glimpse of pity. Your grandfathers were great, so we were united with them, but now it's impossible because you're so weak, you don't remember your own history, something like that. And one more point, sometimes his ideologists, his propagandists, sometimes he himself, they say, look, we are trying to recreate real European values. You forgot your values in Europe.
Right, so what are real European values, according to Putin?
It's like what this very traditionalism, I would say it's quite close to far-rightist discourse of different European parties, the spectre. It looks like MAGA ideology, the ideology of white man. It has in its core anti-migrant mood. In Russia, we have very specific anti-immigration policy, despite the fact that we do not have enough labor force, and birth rate is downgrading.
For the sake of viewers, I'm just going to recall a memory from Moscow, which is that I remember seeing policemen standing in the metro checking documents of people who were non-white. Anyone who was non-white who walked past them, they'd call them over and check their documents. So it was kind of like a precursor to what we're seeing with ICE in the U.S. now.
Yes, absolutely. We have the same situation now in Moscow and St. Petersburg, everywhere. And it ignites this xenophobia in Russians. But there are not so many, let's say, migrants right now in the streets after this campaign. So this is American-like, modern American-like policy and narrative, and far-right parties are quite close in an ideological sense to Kremlin ideologies.
Yeah. So we are we're recording this about a week after the 2026 Munich Security Conference. I was struck by U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio's apparent indifference to what's going on inside Russia. You mentioned his speech earlier. While he portrayed himself as a great critic of Soviet communism, mentioning the Berlin Wall, the Cuban Missile Crisis, Ronald Reagan's phrase, evil empire. He used the phrase godless communism, which was popular in America in the 1950s, probably. He seems to know very little about post-Soviet Russia, or to want to know very little about it. So, for example, when he was asked whether Russia was serious about negotiations over Ukraine, he said he didn't know. When he was asked about, he was presented with findings from 5 European countries that Alexei Navalny had been poisoned in prison using a poison derived from a South American frog. All he could say was that these findings were troubling. He didn't dispute them. He seems to want to reduce the war in Ukraine to a property dispute, something that's unencumbered by ideology. What do you think of the current U.S. policy towards Russia and Ukraine?
It is very contradictory, for sure. But we are facing the story of real estate managers facing with investment bankers, and they're trying to make a deal. From the Russian side, we have Kirill Dmitriev, who is an investment banker with American education, with an experience of the work in different investment banks in America and Russia. So they're making deal, and in that sense, political process is something on the margins of the story. This is one track of the current relations between Russia and the United States. At the same time, I think Trump respects Putin as a strong man in a different sense. Maybe he understands that we have a kind of a personalistic dictatorship, but Putin is a serious person in his eyes, who dares to wage the war in Europe in 21st century. It's quite serious. But for sure, his administration, his aides, they can't understand the essence of this war. The imperialistic ambitions of Putin, his nationalism. But to some extent it doesn't matter, because Trump thinks like Putin in terms of spheres of influence. This is yours, this is mine. Let's share the world with you and Chinese leader, for instance. 3 strong men like Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin, we can find a solution how to share the world. I think this is quite close to the truth, this kind of thinking. And it is quite close to the Putin's thinking about how the new world order must be reestablished. He wants, at the end of the day, some kind of a iron curtain, the new balance of powers. But the first step to this new balance of powers is the annexation of some territories of Ukraine. and the job is unfinished for the moment. So, and because of that, Putin continues this special military operation.
What is what is Putin's end goal in Ukraine?
Angle, in a sense.
What will he settle for?
Nobody knows properly. What does he want? He articulated some goals of this special operation to exclude NATO from Ukraine, but NATO is here much closer than it was before the war. He wanted Ukraine to be denazified, but if he meant Ukrainian nationalism right now, Ukraine has got a new identity, which is strongly anti-Russian. It wasn't so in the previous years because the world was flat, and if we were talking about Ukrainian youth, Russian youth, it was the same, absolutely. Polish youth, Spanish youth, etc., etc. Now we are isolated, so hated by Ukrainians. Russians are toxic in the whole world, except maybe some countries in the third world. And this is a result of the special operation. In my opinion, Putin could keep himself in power for years ahead without any kind of war, because of total indifference of the majority of the Russian population to the political process. But he wanted something more. Because of that, I say that ideology matters in the case of Putin. Ideology was the leading force for the special military operation. This is a practical implementation of the ideological ideas, ideological prejudices of Putin and his inner circle.
When we talk about the ideology, well, we've talked about all kinds of historical influences, themes. From a practical point of view, what should Western leaders know about the ideology? What should they be considering in their relations with Russia?
They must accept that ideology matters, as I said, that this is the main leading force for Putin, and this Russian messianism must be excluded from the political process, and only in that case Russia can be kind of a modernized society. Without it, Russia will never be like normal Western country. The problem is that the world is now very shaky. The old world order is in great danger, and we are living in some kind of a new world disorder. But Putin, nevertheless, could be a banal far-rightist leader, nationalist, just like in Europe, but at the same time he's a unique because he's a practical man. He decided to initiate this special military operation. And this is really unique for 21st century and for more or less modernized society in Russia. He refused to modernize Russia. He crashed everything. He refused from his always achievements during the years of high rates of oil and gas and high prices and good economic performance of Russia. Russia could be a flourishing country. We see how much money he has, Putin, how much money he's spending on the war. If he will spend this money on education or healthcare, we will have a much better country than it was even before the special military operation. The country found out that this country was very rich and very successful in terms of market economy, which saves right now Putin's regime. It's understandable we will not have any kind of future with Putin. he must like disappear physically or politically. Before that, nothing could be restored in terms of relations with the West, normalization of Russia. But the West must understand that Russians are not unique and abnormal, because the same nationalistic discourse we see now in Europe and the United States, everywhere. The question of collective responsibility for war, this is not a specific Russian question. Let's take Spain, let's take Italy, let's take Germany. This is the same. We Russians, we will face this problem in the future, and now, believe me, we have very serious discussions inside this bubble of liberal-minded Russians. Very painful discussions for us. This is the main things which must be understandable for Western communities, political communities.
One of the things that Orwell held as his kind of central ideal, maybe, was the idea of facing unpleasant facts. And it's something that countries do to with various degrees of success historically. So, for example, the Trump administration doesn't like exhibits about slavery, for example, wants to tear them down. In Russia, it's to do with the Gulag. Some countries have faced their history very forthrightly, even if not immediately after a crisis, like Germany, for example. They've faced it very directly. Why did that project of facing history, why was it not successful in Russia? In other words, why was facing the Stalinist past not more successful? Why was there no lustration to remove the Chekists, the KGB people, from positions of power? Why did that not succeed in Russia?
Yes, we had reforms and modernization, especially in the first years of an independent Russia. But at the same time, this modernization was an unfinished business. Because really, just like in some European countries, we decided that everything is okay forever, especially after the failure of communists in 1996. So a lot of Russians thought that we must have a new president, younger than Yeltsin, not so, let's say, unhealthy. Let it be more authoritarian, no problem. The main thing is to finish economic structural reforms, and everything will be okay, and we will enjoy our westernized life. To some extent, we have got this result. We have all these low-hanging fruits of market economy, and Putin was a happy guy with high oil prices, and with the end of the transition period, which was really serious and painful for some social groups. But after that, we had a prosperity. It wasn't his achievement. It was the achievement of a previous generation of reformers. So nobody paid a lot of attention to history until the moment when Putin began this process of Westernization and new wave of indoctrination with glorious history and returning to the past, to the fundamentals of the Russian statehood. So again, maybe majority of Russians are quite indifferent to some historical points, but being very, very, very indifferent, very obedient, sometimes this is learned indifference. They prefer to accept these ideological points as something real, as something which these points are explaining the world, and they justify the war. We were attacked, we were always the best and the brightest, so they wanted our territories, our something, I don't know what, but this guy, which is at the very top, he's trustworthy. He said that we were humiliated, so we must recreate ourselves. So this is very weak knowledge of history. And the main problem is that the nation didn't go through the process of understanding of Stalin's period. Stalin was a figure somewhere in the past, a great leader, quite cruel, nothing more. But the Russian history, in my opinion, this is kind of an alternating of the periods of Stalinization and de-Stalinization. Now we are inside the period of very strong, the strongest maybe in recent years, of very strong re-Stalinization of everything. Maybe even, as I said, without mentioning Stalin, but everyone understands what we are talking about. And lack of understanding of your own past, and here we are. This is a result of a real rewriting of the history by the authorities. Quite successful story for Kremlin.
How does this manifest in day-to-day life? So you go out into the street, you're out and about in Moscow. How are you seeing the ideology reflected in everyday life?
Nearly nothing you could see in the streets, for sure. In metro, in a city transport, in the streets, you see people who are scrolling their smartphones, trying to reset connection because of some problems with WhatsApp, Telegram, blocking VPN and all that stuff. Playing games on your smartphones or scrolling through stores like food or clothes or something like that, not more, just like in any other country. But nevertheless, everyone instinctively understands what does it mean to be obedient and good citizen. You must support everything in a public conversation, let's say. You must be very cautious when you are staying in a metro with your own smartphone, because there was a wave of denunciations from different people who wrote some letters to, for example, procurator office in order to punish your neighbor, because this aggressiveness, this aggressive conformism is also a feature of many people right now. You never know who is your neighbor in a city transport, whether he is a secret supporter of democracy or open supporter of Putin and the war. And these people, they have advantage for sure in terms of being, let's say, they will not be punished by the authorities, vice versa. So at schools, somewhere in the streets, you have like billboards, which are appealing to the future soldiers, which are appealing to contracts until now. Schools, budget-dependent organizations, for sure. I think they have a lot of ideological points in their public behavior, and everyone must be obedient. This is a difference between the authoritarian state. You could be simply mute and enjoy your life. It was a part of the social contract in previous years of Putinism. You could be mute, but you must support Putin, you must vote, and then you can be free. Make a photo of yourself at the polling station, and then you can use your time in any way. Now the regime wants complicity. He wants your body, he wants your mind, he wants your more vocal and open support. He doesn't want, he wants to exclude liberal-minded people totally from any kind of public discourse, any kind of life. And Putin insists on total unity of our nation. All the time he repeats these words. And this is kind of, I name it majority effect. When you see that everyone is for Putin, you will behave more or less cautiously in that sense. It isn't enough, like in the old Italian anecdote, one of the favorite my anecdotes, when one of the sons of Mussolini asks him, "Father, what kind of regime do you build?" And Mussolini answered, "Eat up and shut up." So it is not enough right now to eat up and shut up. You must give money because our heroes, they need this money in the trenches. We need this money for weaponry. So the state openly says that you must survive this period because you must pay for our greatness. You must share with the state this price. It wasn't so 3 years ago, 4 years ago at the very beginning of the special operation. The old social contract was in action. Now we have a new one. We will not touch you, we will not prosecute you if you will pay money for us and you will be obedient. This is much more dangerous social contract. And I name it hybrid totalitarianism, not full-scale totalitarianism, not classical totalitarianism, but kind of something new.
Mm-hmm.
This mixture of different kind of possible behaviors, and we have a market economy at the end of the day, despite the fact that the third point in this Putin's construction, nationalistic ideology, hybrid totalitarian political regime, and the third point is more state interventions into the economy and spending money on the military-industrial complex and on war. But market economy is still here, and it still contributes food and clothes to people until now.
Yeah. In the book, you describe economic and demographic crises that Putin has set up for Russia's future. You try to envision a Russian future after Putin where people recognize that the country has fallen behind because of the war. There emerges a new modernizing impulse. So could you please outline those economic and demographic crises that you see being stored up for the future and what a remodernization would look like?
Demographically, this is one of the most important points in current life. Russia is degrading, a lack of working force because of this anti-migrants policy, as we mentioned it. Very low birth rate, the lowest in years, partly because of long trends, partly because of this war. I mean, not only some casualties, death of people and returning of wounded people, but emigration as well. The best and the brightest...
Over 1 million have left, I think.
I think yes, and this is not the end of the story because now this process is very slow, but some people are trying to share time between their new homes and Moscow. Part of the family could be in Moscow, part of the family could be somewhere else, and younger generation for sure of the prosperous families, well-qualified workers, they are all abroad. I can say that I don't have here some kind of a group to communicate with, but these people are aged people with liberal views, but in their 60s, 70s, rarely in their 40s, 50s. And the typical situation is when children and grandchildren are abroad and grandfathers, grandmothers are here. So this is very bad demographic situation, and this is very bad for the future of this regime as well. And from the point of view of this very problem of future, I must say that this regime doesn't have a goal setting. What is the goal of all this stuff? We were constructing communism, then capitalism. Okay, it was understandable. Simply to be consumers, everything is okay. Let it be like authoritarian modernization, but modernization. For the moment, we don't have modernization. We have the authoritarian, half totalitarian regime. What is the goal? The goal is articulated as ideologically as a fight with the West. So okay, it will take time, just like the construction of communism, a certain amount of time, and how we can measure this victory over the West, nobody knows. What does it mean? What for? So this is a question for years, maybe after the peace agreement, which will come maybe not in the nearest future, but maybe in a year or two, I don't know. This is not the question of nearest future for sure. So where do we go? So many victims. So what? A new Cold War with degrading economy, with degrading demography. How to survive this period of time? So it was an attempt of the authoritarian modernization. And as I said, we don't have modernization, we have demodernization, which depends on not only economy, but on political line, on domestic policy and the foreign policy of Putin. So it means that we are in trouble, and we will have to recreate ourselves after Putin from, let's say, scratch, from zero line. It will be a very hard process, maybe much harder than the exit from the communism, when everyone was inspired by the idea of a free society, of market economy. Right now we will not be inspired by anything, because we have survived authoritarianism. Before that there was a Western democracy in our space, but unsuccessful story. What will be the next point to achieve? Nobody knows. This is a problem.
On that sad note, I guess we should wrap up. Thanks very much, Andrei. The book is The Closing of the Russian Mind, How Putin's Ideology Took the Nation Hostage. Andrei writes for New Times, Novaya Gazeta, Foreign Affairs. You can find him on X at ANDR Kolesnikov. You can follow me on the Orwellians Substack at theorwellians.substack.com. Please subscribe or donate to support the channel. I'm on X at Roland E. Brown, Instagram at Roland Elliott Brown. You can find my long-form articles in New Lines magazine. Thanks very much, Andrei.
Thanks a lot.